July 2nd, 1994.
Colombia World Cup soccer fans took that about a million steps further. On June 22nd in Pasadena's Rose Bowl, the U.S. won a 2-1 game in which Colombia defender Andrés Escobar accidentally kicked the ball into his own net. Colombia, one of the favorites going in, was eliminated in the first round. The team returned home on Wednesday to anonymous threats that were carried out. It was at 3:30 a.m. in front of this restaurant. 27-year-old Andrés Escobar got into his car. He was surrounded and shot 12 times and killed. Allegedly, one of the assailants yelled, "Thanks for the auto goal." In Colombia, thousands of mourners gathered to mourn the loss of the Colombian star.
Was it really because of a mistake during a football match? Or was that only the story everyone was meant to believe? Tonight we investigate one of the most disturbing mysteries in sports history, the death of Andrés Escobar. A man known as the Gentleman, a man admired by teammates, respected by rivals, loved by millions, a man who seemed to have no enemies. So how does a man like that end up murdered? Who wanted him dead? And what secrets were hiding beneath the surface of Colombian football? To understand the murder, we must first understand the man. Because long before he became a symbol of tragedy, Andrés Escobar was simply a boy growing up in one of the most dangerous cities on earth, and honestly, he had no idea that football would eventually place him directly in the path of death. To understand Andrés Escobar, you must understand Medellín. Today, many people know Medellín as a modern city, but during the 1970s and 1980s, it was something very different. The city was becoming the center of a growing criminal empire. Violence spread, fear spread, money flowed through the streets, power changed hands rapidly. And, behind much of it stood one name: Pablo Escobar. No relation to Andrés, yet, the shadow of that surname would follow him throughout his life. Andrés Escobar was born on March 13, 1967. His family was relatively stable. Unlike many children around him, he grew up with guidance and structure. His parents believed in education, discipline, respect. These were values that would define his personality forever. Even as a child, people described him as calm, polite, serious, focused. He wasn't known for causing trouble. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He was different. And football quickly became his passion. But could football really provide a future in a city where violence seemed to control everything? Or was he destined to become another victim of Medellín's dangerous streets? No one knew, not yet. Most future football stars dream of scoring goals. Andrés dreamed of preventing them. Even as a teenager, he showed unusual intelligence on the field. He studied opponents, anticipated passes, positioned himself perfectly. He wasn't the fastest player, he wasn't the strongest, but he saw things others didn't. Coaches noticed immediately. His leadership stood out, his composure stood out, and soon, bigger opportunities arrived. The young defender joined Atlético Nacional, one of Colombia's most important football clubs. This would change everything, but hidden behind the success of Colombian football was a disturbing reality. Many clubs had connections to powerful criminal organizations. Money was flowing into football, huge amounts of money. Where was it coming from? Who controlled it? And just how much danger did players unknowingly face? By the mid-1980s, Andrés Escobar was becoming famous, but not only because of his talent. People admired his character. He spoke respectfully, behaved professionally, and avoided scandals. In a sport filled with controversy, he seemed almost impossible to dislike. Journalists nicknamed him El Caballero del Fútbol, the gentleman of football. Imagine that. In a nation struggling with violence, corruption, and fear, one football player became known simply for being decent. Yet, success brings attention. Attention brings pressure. And pressure creates enemies. Did Andrés have enemies? Most people said no. But is that really possible? Can someone become famous in Colombia during that era without crossing paths with dangerous people? The answer may surprise you. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Colombian football was transforming. Talented players emerged everywhere. The national team became stronger. Fans began dreaming. Could Colombia become a world football power? The answer seemed increasingly likely. Players like Carlos Valderrama, Freddy Rincon, Faustino Asprilla, and Andrés Escobar, together, they represented hope, national pride, and a better future. For a country tired of violence, football became an escape. Andrés became one of the leaders of that movement, but every dream has a price, and sometimes the higher you rise, the harder you fall. Could the very success that made Andrés famous eventually lead him toward disaster? At the time, nobody imagined it. But fate was already moving, slowly, silently, waiting. In the early 1990s, Colombia shocked the football world. Experts began calling them potential World Cup champions. Millions believed history was about to be made. But what nobody realized was that one tournament, one match, and one single touch of a football would eventually trigger events ending in murder. Next time, we follow Colombia into the 1994 World Cup, a tournament that promised glory, but delivered death. 1993. Something extraordinary was happening. For decades, Colombia had been viewed as a talented football nation. Now, they were becoming something much bigger, something dangerous, something feared. The Colombian national team was no longer an underdog. They were becoming a genuine contender, and nobody symbolized that confidence more than Andrés Escobar. By now, he was one of the team's leaders. Calm, reliable, disciplined, the kind of player every coach wanted, the kind of player every teammate trusted. Then came the match that changed everything. September 5, 1993, World Cup qualification, Colombia versus Argentina. The match took place in Buenos Aires. Argentina was expected to win. Instead, the world witnessed something shocking. Colombia destroyed Argentina 5-0. The football world was stunned. Experts could hardly believe it. Fans celebrated across Colombia. For many people, it felt like a turning point in history. Could Colombia actually win the World Cup? Some thought so. Even famous football figures predicted greatness. The pressure grew, the expectations grew, the betting grew, and that last part would become critically important, because while fans dreamed of trophies, others were thinking about money. Huge amounts of money. Money capable of changing lives, or ending them. As the 1994 World Cup approached, Colombia became one of the tournament favorites. Imagine the pressure. An entire nation expecting greatness, millions believing victory was inevitable, media outlets praising the team daily, predictions everywhere, but hope can become a burden. And when massive amounts of money become attached to hope, things become dangerous. Some reports suggested enormous gambling activity surrounded Colombia's World Cup campaign. Professional gamblers, businessmen, powerful individuals, people who expected Colombia to go far. People who stood to lose enormous sums if things went wrong. But who exactly were these people? How much money was involved? And would those losses eventually lead to violence? No one could answer those questions yet, but the stage was being set. A stage where football and danger would collide. June 22, 1994, the Rose Bowl, Los Angeles, the United States versus Colombia. It should have been a routine victory for Colombia. At least that's what many expected. Then came the moment that would follow Andrés Escobar forever. The United States attacked. A dangerous cross entered the penalty area. Andrés moved to intercept. It was instinct, the action of a defender doing his job. But something went wrong. The ball struck his foot, changed direction, and rolled into Colombia's net. An own goal. Silence. Shock. Disbelief. Millions watching around the world saw it happen. Andrés himself could hardly believe it. One touch, 1 second, one mistake. Could a single moment really destroy a life? At that moment, nobody imagined the answer might be yes. The match ended with Colombia defeated. He wrote an article, a message of hope, a message of dignity. He urged Colombians to stay united, to remain positive, to move forward. Nobody reading those words realized something chilling. They were among the final public statements he would ever make. After elimination, the team returned home. Andrés returned to Medellín. Friends later said he seemed disappointed, but not broken. He had plans, dreams, future opportunities. European clubs were interested. His career was far from over. His life was far from over. Or so everyone thought. Then strange warnings began appearing. Friends allegedly advised him to stay home, to avoid public places, to let the controversy fade. Why? Were they worried about angry fans, or were they worried about something far worse? Did somebody already know Andrés was in danger? If so, who, and why? The answers remain disturbingly unclear. On the night of July 1st, Andrés Escobar decided to go out with friends. It seemed harmless, a normal evening, a chance to relax, a chance to forget football, a chance to move on. But somewhere in Medellín, another group of men was also enjoying the night. Their paths were about to cross, and before sunrise, one of them would be dead. Of all the theories surrounding Andrés Escobar's death, one has remained the most persistent: the gambling theory. To understand it, we need to return to 1994. Before the World Cup began, expectations for Colombia were enormous. Some analysts believed Colombia could reach the semifinals. Others believed they could win the tournament entirely. Millions of dollars were wagered on their success. Professional gamblers followed every match. Businesses followed every match. Powerful individuals followed every match. And, when Colombia failed, those expectations collapsed overnight. According to this theory, certain people lost significant amounts of money because Colombia was eliminated. The own goal became the symbol of that disaster. Not because Andrés intended it, not because he deserved blame, but because it became the easiest moment for angry people to focus on. In this version of events, Andrés became a target, a symbol, a scapegoat. The theory suggests that some individuals wanted revenge, not to seem impossible to ignore. A national tragedy, a humiliating elimination, massive financial losses. Then, only days later, the death of the player most closely associated with the tournament's defining mistake. Coincidence or consequence? The debate continues. Another theory focuses less on money and more on emotion: the scapegoat theory. History shows that societies often search for someone to blame after disasters. Sometimes that blame is fair, sometimes it is not. In football, a single player can become the face of defeat, even when an entire team shares responsibility. Andrés Escobar's own goal became one of the most famous moments of the 1994 World Cup. Television networks replayed it repeatedly. Newspapers discussed it constantly. Fans talked about it everywhere. For some people, Andrés became unfairly linked to the failure of an entire nation. Could that resentment have fueled violence? Could one individual have become consumed by anger? Could humiliation and frustration have exploded into murder? Supporters of this theory believe the killing may have been less organized than many suspect. Perhaps no conspiracy existed. Perhaps no hidden mastermind existed. Perhaps emotions simply spiraled out of control. But even if that were true, another question remains. Why Andrés? Those who knew him described him as respectful, calm, professional, rarely confrontational. He wasn't known for provoking people, which makes his death feel even more tragic and even more difficult to understand. This is the theory that attracts the most attention: the hidden mastermind theory. It begins with a simple question: what if the man who pulled the trigger wasn't the most important person involved? What if somebody else stood behind the events? Some journalists and observers have long wondered whether the convicted gunman acted entirely on his own. They point to the broader environment of Colombia during that era, a country where powerful figures often operated behind the scenes, a country where influence, money and fear sometimes shaped events in ways ordinary people never saw. Supporters of this theory argue that the public may have learned who fired the gun, but not necessarily who benefited from the murder. The difficulty, however, is evidence. Speculation is easy, proof is not. Decades later, no conclusive evidence has emerged identifying a hidden organizer, no definitive document, no verified confession, no indisputable revelation. Yet the theory survives. Because the questions survive. And whenever questions survive, theories survive with them. In recent years, some researchers have proposed a different possibility, a possibility that challenges everything. What if the murder had less to do with football than people assume? What if the World Cup connection became the dominant narrative because it was dramatic, because it made headlines, because it seemed obvious? Supporters of this idea argue that personal disputes, local tensions, and individual conflicts may have played a larger role than many realize. According to this perspective, football may have intensified emotions, but it may not have been the sole cause. This theory remains controversial. Many people reject it. Others believe it deserves consideration. Regardless of where the truth lies, one fact remains clear: the complete story may be more complicated than the version most people know. And complexity often creates mystery. Imagine Andrés Escobar during those final hours, a 27-year-old athlete, a respected professional, a man with opportunities ahead of him. European clubs reportedly showed interest. His career still had years remaining. His future appeared bright. He likely believed the worst was behind him. The World Cup disappointment would eventually fade. Football fans would move on. Life would continue. He had no way of knowing that the final chapter had already begun. No way of knowing that history would forever remember that night. And no way of knowing that decades later millions of people would still be discussing his death. Trying to understand it. Trying to explain it. Trying to solve what many feel was never completely solved. The reaction to Andrés Escobar's death was immediate. Shock. Disbelief. Sadness. Anger. The funeral drew enormous attention. People filled the streets. People cried openly. People struggled to comprehend what had happened, because Andrés represented something unusual. Hope. Dignity. Sportsmanship. At a time when Colombia desperately needed positive symbols, he became one, and then suddenly, he was gone. For many Colombians, his death felt larger than football. It became a symbol of an era, a reminder of how violence could destroy even the best among them. Today, decades later, Andrés Escobar remains one of the most respected figures in football history, not because he scored hundreds of goals, not because he won the World Cup, not because he became the richest athlete, but because of how he carried himself, how he treated people, how he responded to failure. Killed Andrés Escobar. Officially, we know the answer. A gunman was identified, arrested, convicted. But perhaps that isn't the die. Was it gambling? Was it anger? Was it humiliation? Was it organized influence? Was it a combination of all of those factors? Or is the complete truth still hidden somewhere in the shadows of 1994? Maybe one day new evidence will emerge. Maybe one day another witness will speak. Maybe one day another piece of the puzzle will appear. Until then, the story remains suspended between fact and mystery. A tragedy that changed football forever. A death that shocked the world. And a question that still echoes through history. What really happened to Andrés Escobar? And will we ever know the entire truth? The truth does not disappear. Sometimes, it simply waits. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.